Hi everyone, and welcome to class. Today we're going to talk about the early Cold War years, like right after the end of World War II, all the way up through the Kennedy administration. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can look at the pictures while I'm talking. It's much more interesting that way. And the Cold War begins with these conferences right here that are going to happen at the end of World War II. The first one was the Atlantic Charter that happens in August of 1941, and it is between these two guys here. Now, no, they're not on land at that time. The Atlantic Charter was a conference out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. This man was on an American ship, and this man was on a British ship. It was an interesting logistical nightmare of how they managed to get FDR, who was in a wheelchair, across to the British ship when they would have negotiations over on the British side. But they are going to get together, and this is where they're going to establish the Europe First strategy. But keep in mind, this is going to be where FDR and Winston Churchill's friendship is going to start. And it's going to not have this guy here. And he's always going to feel like he's been left out. And that's going to cause him to be even more paranoid and suspicious than he was to start with. Later on, in January of 1943, you're going to have the Casablanca Conference, and that's when they're planning a strategy, the Second Front, all those kinds of things. By the time we get to Yalta in February of 1945, the Allies can begin to see that they're going to win this one, and it is just a matter of what are we going to do with Germany once the war is over. And this is when they're going to decide how they're going to break up Germany. Germany is going to be broken into four sections. This is the USSR, and then you have the British, the French, and the American section. So this is East Germany, this is West Germany. Because Berlin is located right there deep inside of the Soviet sector, then they're going to decide to break up Berlin in the same fashion. It's going to be East Berlin is going to belong to the Soviets, and then you're going to have the British, the French, and the American sector breaking up West Germany, the democratic side of the break. But it's also at Yalta that, as we talked about before, FDR is going to cave to Stalin, allowing Stalin to capture Berlin in return for his help in helping us defeat Japan. After we have defeated Germany, this guy right here is now president because FDR has died, so this is Truman. And at the Potsdam Conference in 1945, they are discussing, the end strategy, how we're going to get on top of defeating the Japanese and stuff. And Stalin is dragging his feet. He doesn't really want to help. It was just something he said with his fingers crossed behind his back to get what he wanted out of FDR. Well, Harry Truman is not as much of a pushover, and he is going to find out right in the middle of the Potsdam Conference that the Trinity test of the first atomic bomb has worked. And so at that point, he is going to cut off all negotiation with Stalin, and this conflict, this tension is going to arise from that point. It's just going to kind of fester from there. So you're going to have what becomes known as the Cold War. A Cold War is a difference of philosophies and belief systems more than it is an actual confrontation with weapons. And this is going to be a standoff between the United States and the USSR that's going to last for a little over 45 years. We will never, ever, ever fight directly with each other, but we will support opposing sides in hot wars that are going to come about. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So you're going to have what is known as an Iron Curtain. This is something that Winston Churchill is going to say in a speech that he's given at a commencement, I believe. And this Iron Curtain is this line between the Communist East and the Democratic West. And it's not really a wall or an actual barrier, although both sides are going to guard this through here. The West is going to guard it so that the East doesn't try to push over. The East is going to guard it because they don't want people to escape. My philosophy about communism and about capitalism has always been, if communism is such a wonderful form of government and a wonderful form of economy, why do they have to put up walls to keep people in, or in guards? And if capitalism is such a bad form of economy, then why can't America keep people out? Because people keep coming here in droves. And so, but this is going to be this huge standoff between these two sides. If you have ever seen the movie The Lord of the Rings, and you understand the men of the West with the elves and the hobbits and the men against the evil of the East, Mordor, Sauron, Saruman, you can kind of get an idea in your head of how this Cold War is going to play out. Now, there is going to be a plan that's going to be that's going to be devised. Sorry, I'm trying to think of what the word I wanted to use. It's going to be devised early on, and it's going to be devised by a guy named George Kennan. And it's a way to stop the influence and the spread of communism, and it's known as the containment policy. And the containment policy has got three parts to it. The first part of it is the Truman Doctrine. And that is where America is going to support free peoples anywhere around the world that are being threatened by communist takeover by outside forces. And that could be just in a manner of sending aid and advisors, or it might even include going ourselves and sending military to push back the incursion of communist forces into a country that doesn't want to be communism. It's also going to include the Marshall Plan. Now, the Marshall Plan is where we are going to send extraordinary amounts of money, billions of dollars, to Europe to rebuild Europe. And so you're going to take towns like this. This right here is Stuttgart. This is Stuttgart right at the end of the war in 1945. And this is Stuttgart 10 years later. And because of the Marshall Plan, we have rebuilt the city. And this is going to help deter these devastated European countries from wanting to turn to a different political system, thinking that was going to fix their problems and their troubles. The last part of the Truman Doctrine is going to be NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And this is a military alliance between the Western democracies and the United States and Canada as a mutual protection group. Later on, it is going to be countered by the Soviets with what's known as the Warsaw Pact, and that's going to include most of your communist countries that have come together as a mutual alliance. The only country that won't be a part of the Warsaw Pact is going to be Yugoslavia right here. Yugoslavia was a communist country under the rule of a man named Marshal Tito, but Tito did not trust Stalin any more than he trusted these guys over here, and so he's going to keep his country separate. So it's not going to become what is known as a satellite nation. So here is the Soviet Union over here. Well, all these countries like Poland and Romania and Bulgaria, they're going to be communist as satellite countries of the Soviet Union. And a lot of the people that live in these countries are not going to be happy that they're basically controlled by an outside force. Now, there is another group that's going to be formed during this time period. You know how at the end of World War I, Wilson wanted to create the League of Nations, and we would not have anything to do with it. We don't join the League of Nations. We don't ratify the Treaty of Versailles because we're afraid that it's going to drag us into another European conflict. And after World War II, we're going to find, well, that didn't work so well. And so after World War II, America's never going to be isolationist again. Now, sometimes we'll back off some, but we're still going to be all up in everybody's business. We're going to pick up the philosophy that it's good to keep your friends close, but better to keep your enemies closer. And so we're going to be all over forming the United Nations. And that's what this picture is right here. This is where they first signed the document that establishes the United Nations. The headquarters is located in New York City. If you've ever been to New York City and you know where Rockefeller Center is, if you'll go east past Rockefeller Center like you're going to the East River, and you'll walk right into where the United Nations is. It's got all these flags out in front of it. And so to start with, it is a group of 50 member nations, and they have a secretariat that's going to be the president of the United Nations. But it's also got a group called the Security Council. And this is probably the one that you might have heard about on the news over the past, few years. The Security Council at the time had 11 countries. 6 of the countries that were on the Security Council changed position every 2 years. But there are 5 permanent seats then and now. And the 5 permanent seats are the United States, Great Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union. And these 5 positions have got veto power. For any reason whatsoever, if one of them doesn't like a resolution that's coming before the Security Council, they can veto it, and it goes away. And that's going to come in very important when we start talking about the Korean War. Now, in the late 1940s, Stalin is rather annoyed that people are leaving his communist area in like an open sieve, going from East Germany to West Germany by going from East Berlin to West Berlin. And he doesn't like it. And he doesn't want them to keep moving. Now, Germans don't really like communism. It was kind of thrown upon them. A lot of East Germans don't want to be communists, and so they're trying to escape the Soviets. And so Stalin is going to blockade Berlin. So you see Berlin's right here. And so you cannot get to Berlin from any way over here by water, by ground. You can't walk there. You can't take a bus, drive there. The only way you can get into West Berlin is by flight. Okay. And so it's called the Berlin blockade. And so Truman, it feels like this is a direct confrontation. And so he's going to answer it in 2 ways. The first thing he's going to do is something called Operation Vittles. And that's what this picture is. He's going to have cargo planes of the United States Army and Navy. They're going to fly in supplies every day into West Berlin. Now, this one here is special. You see all these kids sitting here or standing here on this hilltop. These are children who know that this is what they call the chocolate pilot. They also called him Captain Wiggly Wings because he would wiggle his wings to let them know that was his plane. And as he flew across, he would drop candy that was on little parachutes for these kids. And it was really, really special. There's a book out there called Mercedes and the Chocolate Pilot. If you ever get a chance to read it, it's a children's story, but it's very interesting and talks all about how important this was to this one girl named Mercedes. And so for a lot of kids who lived through this time period, they like American Hershey's chocolate more than they like German chocolate because it's wrapped around a memory of something that was really nice that happened in a very hard time for them. And so Operation Vittles is trying to keep West Berlin fed and supplied during this time period. He's also going to take B-29s that are capable of carrying a nuclear bomb, and he's going to park about 10 of them, maybe 11, over in Great Britain. Now, no, they don't have an actual bomb on them, but Stalin doesn't know this, and they are within striking range of the Soviet Union and of Moscow. And so it takes him almost a year, but Stalin is finally going to back off and open up West Germany again where you can get to it by land. But that's known as the Berlin Airlift. Well, this is also going to kick off what becomes known as the nuclear arms race. And this is a competition between the 2 countries over who was going to have the biggest and baddest weapon, who could blow up the other side faster. And they're going to keep from blowing each other up by something called mutually assured destruction or massive retaliation. And this was the idea that each country had the technology to be able to tell when their enemy had launched nuclear missiles at them. And they could launch their missiles at the other side, and they would just knock each other out. And both groups were of the philosophy of, well, what good is it going to do me to knock out my enemy if all it's going to do is destroy me as well? And so that's what kept both of these sides from actually pushing the red button and setting off a nuclear war. Now, back in America, Americans are driven by fear during this time period that they're going to be annihilated by a nuclear war. And so we are looking for communists under every stone, behind every curtain. And this guy right here is not going to help the situation any at all. This is a cartoon of a guy named Joseph McCarthy, who is a senator out of Wisconsin. Now, one of the first things the country is going to do, Congress is going to pass the Federal Employee Loyalty Program, where if you worked for the federal government, you had to take an oath that you were going to be loyal to the United States, much like, the president would take or Congress takes. But Joseph McCarthy is going to take this one step further. He is going to go on a witch hunt through the State Department and start accusing people using flimsy, made-up evidence to accuse them of being communist. And he had the knack of being able to do what is called the multiple untruth. He could build a lie upon a lie upon a lie and would never answer a question back directly. And so all these accusations become baseless and improvable. But it's going to play on the fear of communism, especially when China falls to communism. Because now we have half of the world, because, Soviet Union and China are two of the largest, probably the two largest countries in the world, and now both of them are communist. And so it's going to drive this fear of communism lurking everywhere. In fact, one of the communist leaders is going to say that America will never be defeated by being attacked by the Soviet Union. It will succumb to communism by coming through our schools and our churches and our community organizations. And so it made it a very subliminal type of attack, and therefore everybody was afraid that it was hiding everywhere. Alger Hiss is going to be accused of being a spy. He's part of a group that HUAC is going to investigate, led by Richard Nixon. And I don't believe that he was ever convicted of that, but Ethel and Julius Rosenberg will be convicted of spying for the Soviets and selling them nuclear secrets, and they will both be executed. And so this climate of fear is going to exist all the way through the 50s and into the 1960s. You're going to have McCarthy is finally going to be discredited because he starts attacking the U.S. military. And finally I was going to say, oh, that is enough. I mean, these guys went over and sacrificed their lives for us to defeat the Germans and the Japanese. And now you're going to attack them as well. And so they're finally going to, back him down, and he will kind of disappear into the shadows. You also, like I said a minute ago, you have the House Un-American Activities Committee, also known as HUAC, and they're going to investigate the infiltration of communism in the movie industry. Now, if you know anything about Hollywood, you know that the Hollywood movie industry is probably one of the more liberal industries we have in this country. And so it was fairly easy to accuse them of socialism and communism. And they're going to accuse writers and producers and directors more than they're going to accuse actors. And there's going to be 10 that they're going to bring in to testify in front of a Senate committee. And these are known as the Hollywood 10. Now, there's going to be a bunch of famous movie stars that are going to come and support their friends that are being attacked, like Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall and stuff like that. And these Hollywood 10, as they become known, they'll never work in Hollywood again. They're going to be blacklisted. Even though none of them were actually convicted of being a spy, it's going to give them a bad name, and they're going to get blacklisted in Hollywood, and so they'll never work in Hollywood again. So to be blacklisted means that you've been put on a list that says that you're no good. It's kind of like boycotting that you've heard of today. Today, when somebody says, well, they're this and that and the other, you don't want to buy anything from them. Or we're not going to sell their product or something like that. It's the same type of thing as that. You also have the Verona Papers, which are World War II secret messages that have been decoded that are supposedly tied to the spread of communism. And so this is kind of the atmosphere that America is living in the 1950s. And that is going to be aggravated when the Soviets launch Sputnik. Now, Sputnik is a satellite like this one here. That's supposed to be a picture of Sputnik. And they were the first ones to get something successfully into space. And America is going to lose their mind because now the Soviets are ahead of us in something. But the interesting thing about what would become known as the space race is the Soviets are going to beat us at everything except the last thing, and that's getting a man on the moon. And so with Sputnik going into space, that's going to change a lot of stuff in America. Number one, Congress is going to establish the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, which is NASA, and we're going to start working actively on catching up in the space program. We're going to bring in a guy named Wernher von Braun, who was a German who had helped create the V-1 rocket that had done so much damage to Great Britain during the war. But he had rocket knowledge, and so he's going to be forgiven of all crimes and misdemeanors so that he can come in and help us with our space program. It's also going to change American education. Starting first off in colleges, there's going to be a higher requirement for math and science classes and making sure that you know foreign languages to get a college degree. That later on is going to move down into the public school system, where high school students today have to have 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of English, and 4 years of history, as well as foreign language and other technical type of electives, so that they can get into the best colleges across the country. And so a lot of that is going to be jump-started by the launch of Sputnik in 1957. Also in 1957, you're going to have some other things around the world that are going to happen. You're going to have where Egypt is going to seize control of the Suez Canal, and that is the cut through between the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf. Here recently, there was a news bit where a tanker ship had gotten sideways in the Suez Canal and had blocked it up for like 2 or 3 days. But back during this time period, Egypt is going to gain control of it, and that is going to cause the British and the French to start ratcheting things up against Egypt. And so America is going to kind of step in and say, hold up, calm down. And they're going to get it to work out when the canal reopens. But it was really tense there for a little bit, right there around the canal area. Also in 1957, this guy right here, that's Fidel Castro, he is going to take over in Cuba. And he's going to depose a guy named Batista. Batista was a really bad guy. Fidel Castro wasn't any worse than Batista, but he wasn't any better either. And this is when Cuba is going to start to turn towards communism in 1957 and from that point on. And then this guy right here, this is Gary Powers, and he is an American pilot of one of our spy planes, a U-2 spy plane, and it is flying over Soviet airspace and gets shot down. And we're going to come back and say, oh, no, that wasn't us. You know, I don't know what was going on. Maybe he got off course. And we didn't see anybody over there. But then they're going to bring him out. You know, America had figured that the guy had died in the crash. Oh, no, he survives. And so America's going to say, okay, yes, we were over there. We're sorry. We won't send anybody else. We'll stay on, you know, and that kind of thing. So it was pretty tense with the U-2 spy plane incident. And then to cap all that off, China is going to fall to communism, to Mao Zedong and his communist forces. And so the nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek are going to flee to Taiwan, which is about, I think it's 50 miles off the coast of China, and establish the government in exile. And it's the Chinese government in Taiwan that we are going to recognize for the next 20 years. We won't recognize the communist government under Mao Zedong until the Nixon administration. And so this is when China becomes a communist country. And that's just going to add to the hysteria in this country over communism. They're going to accuse Truman of losing China. And it's like, how can he lose something that he never had possession of to start with? But that's what he's going to be accused of. Now, one of the very first hot war that's going to break out during the Cold War is going to be in Korea. So let me go over here to my map. At the end of World War II, Korea, who had been under the control of the Japanese, is going to be placed under the protective oversight of USSR and the United States. It's going to be split right here at the 38th parallel, and the USSR is going to oversee the top part, and the United States is going to oversee the southern part. And that's going to lead to the next thing, where North Korea is going to become communist and South Korea is going to become more democratic. And so we're going to each be over there for a couple of years after the war, and then we're going to back off and let the North and South Korea do their own thing. And it's not going to be too long after that North Korea is going to invade South Korea, because they want to make it all one country again, and they want to make it communist. And they're pushing the South Korean forces down here to Pusan. This is Pusan right down here. Well, when this happens, Truman is going to run to the UN Security Council and say, hold up, this is a direct affront by the communist government of the Soviet Union trying to overtake all of South Korea. And he is going to ask for a police action against North Korea. And he's going to get it, because in the Security Council at that point, the Soviet Union wasn't there that day. They had gotten their feelings hurt a few days before and had stomped out the Security Council, and they weren't there to veto it. And so that's how we get involved in South Korea without Truman having to ask for a declaration of war from Congress, because it's a UN action. It is not a United States action. And so UN forces are going to be sent to South Korea. They're going to be led by this guy right here. This is Douglas MacArthur. So this is about the third or fourth time we talked about Douglas MacArthur. And he is going to land the main force right here at Pusan. And then he's going to have a side force that is going to land at Incheon. And they're going to move the North Koreans back not only across the 30th parallel, but all the way up here to the Yalu River. Now, the Yalu River is the boundary between North Korea and China. And China's going, oh, hold up, these UN forces aren't going to stop it. They're just going to keep right on coming. And so this is when China jumps in on the North Korean side, pushes the UN forces back, and for 2 years, it's going to be a tug of war right here along this 38th parallel, back and forth and back and forth. If you've ever seen this TV show right here, this is a TV show called MASH, and it's about a mobile army surgical hospital stationed in Korea. And if you don't find it funny, it's because you have to know something about the Korean War, but you also have to know something about the political climate of the 1970s to see how everything works together and makes it funny. But it was really funny for those of us who are in the know. Now, Douglas MacArthur has done a really cool thing, as far as moving the North Koreans out of South Korea. But once the Chinese get involved, he wants to get them off from this direction up here. So he goes to Truman, and he says, hey, I got this great idea. Why don't we land UN forces over here at Shanghai? That'll pull the Chinese away from up here to come down here and defend Shanghai, and that way we won't have to bother with them. And Truman's going to look him square in the eye and go, have you lost your ever-loving mind? Do you want to start World War III? No, you're not going to do that. Well, if you recall what I've told you about MacArthur, nobody ever told him no. And he got his feelings hurt. And he's going to go out and he's going to start bad-mouthing the president in the press. How stupid could it be? This is so stupid. But he disregarded the fact that as president of the United States, Truman is commander-in-chief above everybody in the military. And so he's going to fire MacArthur. Now, the American public are going to go, wait. This is a Medal of Honor winner. He's a great hero. You fired him? But after they thought about it for a few minutes, they said, yeah, that might have been a bad thing for him to have tried to launch an attack on China at this point. And so they're going to, stop railing against Harry Truman for firing MacArthur. And so this is kind of go rocking back and forth until we get into the 1950s. And in 1952, Eisenhower is going to be elected the next president. And not too long after that, Stalin is going to die. And once Stalin dies, then the North Koreans are a little more willing to sit down at the peace table and start talking. And so they're going to come up with an armistice in July of 1953. That is going to be a ceasefire. That's what an armistice is, a ceasefire. And it's going to divide Northern Korea, South Korea at the 30th parallel. It kind of goes along this little river you can see right there. It's still divided there today. This is known as the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone, that both sides guard to this day. Because the problem with the Korean conflict is that there was never a peace treaty that ended this conflict. And so with it only being a ceasefire, all it takes is one side to start firing over the DMZ at the other side, and that war is back on. And we're back involved in it again because, once again, it was a UN action, not a United States action. And so that's where Korea stands at this particular point. Now, one more thing that Truman is going to do before he leaves office is he is going to desegregate the military during the Korean War. And so now you're going to be able to have all different minorities of troops, blacks, Hispanics, whites, are all going to be able to barrack together and serve together. And so this is going to be the first place that they are going to desegregate America. And that's going to give Truman a whole lot of grief. In the 1948 Democratic National Convention, the group called the Dixiecrats, these are your Southern Democrats, are going to storm out of the convention because of Harry Truman's civil rights actions. And Harry Truman was a Democrat. But they didn't like the way he was doing. And so there's going to be a lot of conflict over what Harry Truman wanted to do in regard to civil rights and what some of his party did not want to do in regard to civil rights. Now, we're also going to get involved in Vietnam. Now, our involvement in Vietnam goes back quite some time. It's long before we ever put combat troops into Vietnam. At the end of World War II, Japan had gained control of all of this during World War II. And so it had belonged to the French before. This was known as French Indochina. So it was Vietnam and Laos and Thailand, Cambodia, all this belonged to the French. And the French wanted to come back in and pick up right where they left off. And the Vietnamese are going, oh, no, we don't want you doing that. And so there's going to be a war breakout between the French and the Vietnamese. And the Vietnamese forces are going to be led by a guy named Ho Chi Minh, and his forces are going to be called the Viet Minh. And, of course, we are allies. We've been allies with the French for almost our entire existence, except for some minor squabbles that happened back when we first became a country. We've always been allies with the French. And so, yeah, we're going to send advisors and aid. We don't send any troops over there to help the French. But the French get defeated at Dien Bien Phu. Now, if you are Vietnamese, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pronounce it the best way I can. Just don't laugh at me. I've got my Vietnamese kids that always laugh at the way I pronounce some of the names of the towns. But my pronunciations are based off of what we get to hear on the nightly news, because I grew up during this time period, and what was going on in Vietnam showed up almost every night on the nightly news. So in 1954, the French are kicked out. And you're going to have the Geneva Accords that is going to divide Vietnam at the 17th parallel, north and south. And North Vietnam is going to be under the control of Ho Chi Minh and a communist regime. And the south is going to be under the control of this guy right here. I cannot pronounce his whole name, but his last name is Diem. And it's going to be a pro-democratic government in the south. Now, if you want to look at the background of Vietnam, you can trace it back centuries. I mean, it's got a very, very rich background. It is it's a kingdom, but it had been controlled by the Chinese at one point. It had been controlled by the French at one point, and they really didn't want control of anybody. They wanted to be an independent country, and rightfully so. And so as the southern part start to try to create their own government, we start sending advisors over to help, give advice on how to set up a democratic government. And so under Truman, your advisors is about 650 some odd advisors. And then you have more that are sent over under Eisenhower. By the time we get to the Kennedy administration, there are 16,000 advisors over in Vietnam. Now, this guy right here, Diem, and the capital of South Vietnam is Saigon, and the North Vietnam capital is going to be in Hanoi. He is a Catholic, and there is going to be turmoil between the Catholics and the Buddhists. And the Buddhists in protest are going to martyr themselves. They're going to sit down in the middle of the street, pour gasoline all over themselves, and have somebody set them on fire and die by fire as protest to the Catholic government of Diem. Now, I have had students who had family who were part of Diem's government, and the story that we get over here is not exactly what he says went on over there. He was saying that the Buddhists also had their part to play. It wasn't just the Diem's Catholics that were persecuting the Buddhists. It was kind of a going back and forth type of thing. And so as we get into the Kennedy administration, things are kind of tense, and we are paying attention very closely because of something called the domino effect, and that's why I have this illustration right here. So when you think of Vietnam and the American containment policy, then you want to think of the domino theory. If one country over here falls to communism, then all these other countries are going to fall down to communism, just like a domino will knock all the rest of the dominoes over. And that's why America was so intent about being involved in Vietnam. Now, at the bottom of your notes, you'll see that I've got yet another prompt. Anytime I can help you practice in how to dissect the information, if you ever have to write about it, how to set it up to make it easier to write about, is what I'm going to add into your notes. And so the question is, to what extent did the policies of the U.S. government in the 1945 to 1961 period successfully address the communist threat, both foreign and domestic? And so I have policy, and then another column for describing that policy, and then the analysis of whether it succeeded. So what you're going to want to do is you want to go back and look at what the government policies were from the end of World War II up to the very early parts of the Kennedy administration. So we're not going to get into talking about when we actually put combat troops into Vietnam. So you're talking about the Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan, containment policy in general, McCarthyism, HUAC, the Federal Employee Loyalty Program, any of those things, you're going to want to list, I'd say 4 or 5 of them over here under policy, describe what they are, and then decide, did they work? Did they keep America or keep communism from spreading, or did it not do any good at all, and why? And that would give you a way to be able to practice that identify, define, and connect strategy, so that whenever you're writing about a piece of evidence in an essay or in a short answer question, then you have been able to tie it effectively and to be able to answer the question completely so that you get credit for it. Next class, we're going to talk about the 1950s and all of the fun stuff that happened in that decade of prosperity. And so we'll get together then. Have a good day. Bye.